Good evening, everyone. For those of you joining us from off campus, welcome to Hobart William Smith Colleges. For everyone else, thank you for joining our presentation this evening. Tonight is the first of 4 of the Sustainable Community Development Lecture Series. And tonight we'll be hosting 2 of the presenters that Carrie Varner will introduce in just a second. My name is Adam Maurer. I'm the Program Manager for the Finger Lakes Institute. Just a little bit about the Sustainable Community Development Program. It's a new initiative on campus, and it is funded by the Isabel Foundation. Without further ado, I'm going to leave Carrie to introduce the presenters. Carrie is an instructor of architectural studies at Hobart William Smith Colleges. She has a new course this spring, Environmental Studies and Architectural Studies 351, Sustainable Community Development Methods and Planning. And she will also be leading a team of about 5 HWS students this summer in sustainable community design work. So I'll let Carrie take the floor.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming out. Today is the first in our series. Today's topic is our built environment. We're privileged to have 2 speakers. Our first speaker will be Susan Cosentini. Susan is a graduate of Cornell University and a carpenter and general contractor of 30 years and the founder of New Earth Living in 2009, which is a program to turn vacant lots into small urban eco-villages. She developed a pilot project in a vacant lot next door to her own house in 2009. New Earth Living is a community-oriented development company that's brought together the best practices of sustainability, co-housing, and infill development to create a replicable real estate development model called the Pocket Neighborhood, which I'm sure we'll hear more about. The Pocket Neighborhood focuses on the preservation of arable lands and natural spaces, energy independence, local food production, intentional water conservation, and to fulfill a social need to be connected and supported within a community. The structures on those sites are built using the German passive house technology, a proprietary building assembly method to achieve ultra energy efficiency with a goal of carbon neutrality. Susan will be speaking first. Our second speaker will be Mike Governale. He's currently Interactive Art Director at Partners in Napier, a Rochester-based advertising agency. Mike moved from Rochester from Long Island to study illustration and is a graduate of the Rochester Institute of Technology. He now shares local history and new ideas related to the city of Rochester and transportation on his blog, rochestersubway.com, so feel free to visit it in your spare time. In 2010, Mike founded a transit advocacy group called Reconnect Rochester. He also serves on the board of directors at Friends of the Garden Aerial, a nonprofit organization working to convert pre-existing industrial structures and trails along the Genesee River Gorge at High Falls into multi-use public green space. Additionally, Mike is an admirer of great architecture and volunteers with the Landmark Society of Western New York, the Rochester Community Design Center, and writes a column on local architecture for a new Rochester regional magazine called 585. Mike will be speaking second. Susan, thank you. We'll be taking questions and answers at the end after both speakers.
Okay. Hi. So I am a builder. I've been a builder a really long time. I started in the trades even before I graduated from Cornell. And I've always been really interested in the environment simultaneously. Can you guys hear me? This is working. And I just kept in the inquiry of what's possible, and I had this empty buildable lot next to my house. And we started to think about just putting a super insulated house on there. Like, I knew how to do that. You know, I know how the technology that would be necessary for that. And in the process of that inquiry, kind of discovered that that's really not what the future is. The future is going to be clustered housing. You know, people in relationship with each other, reducing their resource use and environmental impact. So we started with this concept called the dwelling circle, which, as Carrie alluded to, I've changed that name to Pocket Neighborhood. but I'm going to stay with the Polling Circle vernacular. So, let me see. I did go down. I'll go up. Did you do it? There I go. That's the second. Oh, I don't did that then. I don't know. It's not now. That's the second slide. Okay, now. Okay, I did it. Okay, now. It's not consistent. The little thing is not.
You gotta have the door open and
You have to keep the door open. Oh. Oh. That would have been a total mystery for the longest time. Because the doors. All right. Wow, thank you. Okay, so home as houses problem. I hate PowerPoints, but I'm going to do it anyway. All right, so look at, right, they came, everybody came back from the war, 10 million veterans. You needed housing, right? Nobody wanted to go back and live in the big tenements anymore. And and they were overcrowded and they were kind of run down. Okay, so we invented I did. Oh, I did. Okay. Right, so Levittown. You guys are probably all familiar with that. You create the single family residence out there in the suburbs, and you get them in their car, and you've got a happy little consumptive unit that's isolated and just churning through consumptions, not the least of which being fuel, right? I like to say the reason they call the nuclear family nuclear is because it's radioactive. That's what so the consequences are the resource depletion, obviously, energy, materials, and arable land. No stall, man. And let's see, are we here? Wow. Okay. You're going to stand there and do it. You just. No. Okay, go down. Oh, I'm not touching it now. Oh, you're doing it. Oh. Yes, thank you. You're going to press the button. Yeah, you say okay. Oh, okay. All right. Anyway, so obviously we're using the planet up at a rate of 5 planets in the Americas, so we have to reduce that 5 to 1. If we can get 5 people or 5 households to reduce their resource use down to that of 1 household, then we can keep 9 billion people on the planet, I suppose. Okay, thank you. Consequences of obviously using up resources at this rate, you're all familiar with this. The ravaging of climate change, or global weirding, in a way. Yes, thank you. And then, of course, just quality of life, which I imagine you're studying. You know, this isn't a high quality of life, resulting in that emotional condition. Yeah. So, on one side, you've got this sort of, the individual being isolated and using up resources at a high rate because there's no real community, there's no sharing. And then you've got the institutional organization at a big level, and you really don't have anything in between where people can share and be in community and related to each other. Good. So small groups are effective at, obviously, for instance, in the communities I'm creating, they're going to be multi-generational. And, there's someone turning 63 every 8 minutes in this country, right? And there's actually not enough places for those people to go. Well, in these multi-generational communities, you can have the you can imagine that the elder will be taken care of by the other residents, right? The elder may need somebody to shovel their walk, but will make you soup or dinner or do other services around them, or contribute in other ways. So we're going to have that capacity. Informally transferring knowledge, that's, there's nothing to be said about that. It's just an amazing capacity. You don't have to utilize all the different institutional structures for learning. You can just walk into your community space and maybe learn how to play the piano, or whatever skill might be there available to you in your dwelling circle. Sharing and conserving resources. I mean, this is obvious, right? We don't need everybody having a lawnmower. We don't need everybody having a car. All you need is, the internet. You can share vehicles. 4 households can share one vehicle. Positive neighborhood impact. What can happen in a community like where I've positioned my pilot community is we're actually going to foster thinking around sustainability. Right? Just by being there. Deciding quickly and taking significant action. My cohort in this kind of put this together, and we work so closely, I figured I'd understand everything he's saying there. But what that kind of indicates is instead of having to be engaged in the sort of glacial pace of giant institutions in terms of getting the services that you need, you would be reliant on the small group, and you could move a lot quicker towards getting your needs met. Next one, please. So, Housing Challenge in 2011, create home environments which mobilize the positive power of small groups, which is reminiscent of, that saying that everybody's saying now, it only takes a small group of people to exact change. And in fact, we're definitely seeing that in Ithaca. So we've got the capacity to do all kinds of things because you don't have to do it by yourself. And in the communities I'm creating, all landscape is going to be edible. And the gardening won't be done by one person, it'll be done by a group of people. Go ahead. All right, so now we're just going to take a look at the project I'm creating. Go ahead. All right, the dwelling circle is a cluster of 5 to 8 homes built around a shared outdoor space, inhabited by people committed to resource sharing, interdependent social relationship. So we assert that by keeping it less than 8, we have a governance model that's agile, simple, and not a lot of meetings. When we do get together, it's kind of like an extended family. We make decisions over a glass of wine and maybe some dinner. It's not a big civic type of engagement, which can be annoying. Next one. All right, it's limited size, 5 to 8 heads of households around a dinner table for our decision-making process, 25 to 30 people. And by virtue of being urban, this is intended to be an urban eco-village or in a larger civic environment. Cooperative ownership, that's we're using the co-op land use model together with co-housing. Shared outdoor space, ongoing intentional social commitment, which is a commitment for what we're calling listening. And then resource and skill sharing, comprehensive affordability, which I'll get into in the rest of the slides. Oh, there it is. Comprehensive affordability is sort of this nexus of a bunch of things. Starting with the buildings are super, super insulated. These people will have no energy, they have no fossil fuel use. So in fact, with the proper roof square footage, we'll have net zero homes. Energy use is reduced. Location means that you don't have to have a car. You certainly can lose one car in a family. And food production, we are estimating that a family of 4 can reduce their monthly food bill by $60 a month just by on-site food and the fruit cellar. And then the community aspect in terms of just sharing things and saving on all kinds of expenses that way. Childcare is right there for free amongst your neighbors, for instance. All the different things that you don't have to go purchase because it's right there and that you only use episodically. Next slide. Okay. So the Aurora Pocket Neighborhood is, as you can see, right only 4 blocks away from the center city, Ithaca, and really near what we call a third place, which is kind of cool. Third place is somewhere that's not work and not home, and that's a little coffee shop. And then, of course, very close to Cornell, and it's in walking distance to all of that. It's in walking distance to Cornell. It's not in walking distance to Ithaca College, because that's a big hill. Well, that's not entirely true. You could walk there. It's actually not that bad. Maybe not in the winter. So walkability is absolutely crucial. That's like, there's a priority that's at the very top of these communities. Next slide, please. All right, so we're just going to get into the site in the middle. This shows what it was before we did the project. This is my house, and the lot goes back to an alley. The alley was pretty crucial because that's how we're going to get into the units and how we're going to park. And those garages are where I stored all my construction equipment, and the empty lot was just an empty lot. It's where a house burned down years ago. So next slide. And there's the site, formerly. You can see the lot. That's my house, and the barn's out back. And kind of see how the alley bisects the lot. And that's the streetscape right there. Okay. And then this is looking at it as if you're in the alley and in the backyard. No. Oh, I see, okay. So this shows it, yeah, that's great, thank you. This shows what we're doing superimposed on the land. We actually ended up splitting that rear triplex up into 2 homes. I actually reduced the number of units. But that big home is there, that's 1,550 square feet. And then that's 2 separate homes in the back. So go ahead to the next slide. Yeah. So you can see we were going to do way more units. It didn't appear to be marketable, so I reduced the number of units. But you can see how we've created a pedestrian walkway from the Aurora Street, which is the main street. And that would be our, the way we relate to the community is really a pedestrian walkway, and then the parking will be in the rear. So go to the next slide. Showing the community space. The community space is absolutely crucial. If you guys know anything about co-housing, you know that what you're trying to do is as people get out of their cars or as they approach their homes, they go through the community space so they can make a choice to participate socially or not. So we have our community space. The only variance I needed for this project was those structures in the back had to be pushed up against the rear lot lines in order to get that community space. And the community space has to happen, so if they hadn't given me that, I wouldn't have done this. But they did, the city of Ithaca actually was very receptive to this model. So we pushed those 2 new units to the back of the parcel. Other than that, we required no other variances. We had no lot area coverage issues or anything like that. So go to the next slide. This is showing you the development sign. The development, you know, I have this on the in front of the houses being built so that everybody can understand what we're doing. And they'll show you the 2 cottages in the rear. And then the new house that we built, everybody get that? That's the existing house, is that big, ugly Victorian. It's got 1 million additions that I didn't do. I didn't do those additions. I just bought that house as is. And then the new house, which is pink on the left, you can start to see the edible landscape that we're putting in and the pedestrian walkway. And then I kind of identified the various sustainable components that we're incorporating, like a halo around that, which I think we will get into, but it's the airtight, super insulated houses that everything starts with. Not only are they super insulated, but they're thermally broken. They have no thermal bridging, which is the primary passive house aspect, is that you have no thermal bridging. So if you shoot my houses, in fact, I could have brought some infrared shots, you won't see any of the framing members at all. Like you do normally on houses, you'll see the cold coming through that. These houses don't transfer any heat through the framing members. We're doing rainwater collection. We put steel roofs on the houses to collect water. We're putting photovoltaic panels. We're obviously very car-free because we're so walkable. We're going to put a bike facility in. The next project I do with the bike is going to be the big bike facility is going to be way bigger, so you can have 2 bikes, one for winter, one for summer. And then we're putting in a root cellar, and the on-site food production. Okay, you can go to the next one. So our buildings are 950 to 1,500 square feet. Some of them, this one doesn't have a 2-family home. My next project will have 2-family homes, because you can imagine when you gang up houses like that, you can reduce your energy. You can also reduce the cost, which makes it more affordable. We'll probably have more than that. Super insulation, very, very airtight. My houses are 0.4 air change per hour at 50 pascals, which is very, very low. We have to introduce air, obviously, because you're probably familiar with that. You have to introduce air into these houses. And then we're looking to reduce the use of electricity by daylight in all the rooms. And we have highly efficient appliances, and we attempted to do no clothes dryers. We didn't win completely. Some people have dryers. They are putting efficient ones in, and we will be rigging up systems for them to hang their clothes up as well, hoping to encourage that. Because your dryer is one of your biggest energy hogs, primarily because it uses its own energy, and it sucks the heated air out of the house, too. So we're introducing air near our dryers, as well as trying to keep people to not use them. Next slide. Yeah, there's 60 to 70% less energy than comparably sized houses, and that does incorporate the reduced vehicle miles traveled as well. Yeah, okay. So they're small, right? I mean, they're pretty small. They're not that small. There's houses, people are building at 1,000 square feet, but they're tight. They're in an urban environment. So we want to do something to make them psychically wonderful, so that what your experience inside them is not, that you feel like you're living in a spaceship, like a lot of the uber sustainable houses sometimes can feel. So we raised our plate height on the first floor to 9 foot, so that it feels like you're in a bigger space. We definitely did a type of framing that has it very open on the first floor, so that you have that great room feel that everybody wants. Then that makes it feel more expensive as well. We try to do as much sound insulating as possible, because that can make a house, that can have a big impact on making a house feel a lot bigger. And of course, we're very sensitive to the window and furniture placement. I mean, obviously, in a small house, you got to pay attention to that, so that people can situate their things. And I did have conversations with my customers before we placed all the windows. Okay, go ahead. Of course, we were reducing energy just through the smaller houses that it is. We are prepping them all. Only one house is getting the PV array on it right now, but all the houses are prepped for accepting the inverters and everything that'll be necessary to put it on the roof. We're designing our roof pitches for optimal solar exposure. That's sort of a default setting in construction for anything that's going to be, conservative. You're going to design for the south-facing roof pitch. We were going to use solar thermal on our houses, and we actually did abandon that. We discovered solar thermal doesn't work in the wintertime. We didn't discover that, we knew that, but we discovered also that air source heat pumps are currently more efficient than solar thermal, so we went ahead and abandoned the solar thermal. For a while we were going to do that. We also did research, and we're very close to putting in a biomass district boiler for all 4 houses. And then when we found out with Mitsubishi Hyperheats, air source heat pumps, the non-combustion component and the no maintenance feature of those made us go with that instead of the biomass boiler that was actually going to be a district system. We're going to have underground piping to the houses because we're so close together. We could have put insulated pipes in underground to each one of the houses, but we did abandon that. So all the houses have these air source heat pumps now. Go ahead. All right, so this slide just examines the cost, and when I feel like, well, I think it's sort of established, you got to look at these things comprehensively. So when we put it all together, we get this on an average rural or suburban home, with obviously the housing costs being, maybe even lower than the cost associated with owning a car and the heat and electricity. But then when we go to our houses, next slide, obviously the construction cost is going to elevate your mortgage, but then you're going to have, you can get rid of one car, and of course your energy consumption is going to be, in fact, we've determined, I believe, that at this point our houses are going to be lower than that. So it comes out actually lower overall than an existing house because of looking at it comprehensively. Then there's intangibles that you can, like what if I was to factor in childcare for people that they don't have to pay? Or elder care, that type of thing that isn't, or so somebody can actually get rid of that second car because they can, work with their neighbor to have a ride when they need it. Next slide. Solar organics and remineralization. Primarily what that's referring to is all of our beds are raised. Next slide. So we're planning on putting in, as I said, edible landscapes. Some of that's going to be fruit and nut trees. Next slide. And then our beds are put where it's optimal for food production. So we'll do that relative to the solar angle. Those will be our vegetable beds. Next slide. And then, we'll try to put some berry bushes in. One of the things that we'll also be doing with our vegetation that these slides may not describe is we'll be creating personal space associated with every one of the houses so that you're not immediately in the community space. You can actually go outside your house and you'll have a private space that you can hang out in, and that will be a clear signal that you actually don't want to be social. So we're going to do that with various types of plants to achieve that. Next slide. Compost, of course, that's a requirement. That'll help us with our soil organics. Next slide. And then we were planning on having a community-supported agricultural drop-off point in our little pocket neighborhood that will also obviously augment the on-site food production and be something for the community. We have one there right now, and it services about 21 neighbors. Next slide. Root cellar. The root cellar is, food preservation. And a root cellar, actually, when it comes to construction, is counterintuitive. It's not a good thing to have in a house because it's 90% humidity that you want to have in your root cellar. So it actually does add to the cost. But knowing about it up front can reduce it. We've subsequently, to tell you the truth, we've subsequently decided to put that in my old house because it's already got a wet basement. And it's not state-of-the-art like the other houses, so it's a perfect place for the root cellar. Next slide. And then there's just the community space, which will be in the backyard, where us, as well as neighbors, will hang out. We're going to put like one of those wonderful fire pits out there, and a big picnic table, and everybody will hang out there. That's nice. Next slide. So the shared outdoor space is really, really crucial to co-housing and these small urban eco-villages. It's where you get to engage with other people when you're not having a potluck, I suppose, in each other's houses. So it's really important, and gardening is something that can really bring people together. Next slide. All right, so this shows you under construction the project. That's my existing house right there. This is the big new house, the 1,500 square foot house. And you can kind of see the two cottages in the back. And then that's one of them that just got sided like Friday. Just got the siding finished. We're using fiber cement siding on the houses. Next slide. Yeah. So, yeah, the focus is on the people. Keep the cars because you guys know how cars destroy neighborhoods. Supervised. That's kind of cool because now really we can protect our space because of the windows. When you design these houses, they have to have a face that faces the street and a face that faces the community center. So they're actually a particular design. You have to have a way to get out to the community center and a way to get out to the street on some of them. But our cottages in the rear, they just face the community center or the community space. So it's enclosed, that's a feeling of security, amongst other things, and it's permeable to the neighborhood. And the common space has a sense of ownership. Everybody owns that space. Okay, next one. This is my designer. He asserts that it should be shaped in a circle, because, and I agree to some extent. I mean, like half circle's good, but the shape of the thing matters because it creates community just by creating a shape. And we design our common spaces or our public rooms to be adjacent to the community space so that you're more inclined to see people outside, so you're more inclined to participate with them because those spaces are oriented in that around that other outside space. Next slide. This is a rendering of it. Those structures were going to have parking underneath them. I got rid of that, dropped them to the ground. One of the things I didn't like about the elevated houses is those people would be able to sort of peer down at the people in the community space. I also didn't like how they weren't in contact or in a relationship with the ground. And it was a little weird. So we dropped them to the ground and put the parking on either side. Okay, next slide. We're asserting that of these communities, only 50% is the actual structure. Next slide. The other is people and how they relate to each other. So we've actually designed a communication workshop that goes with all the communities. We're using it as our primary relationship builder and governance tool. Next slide. So we have a listening workshop which trains people in what's called active listening, which builds relatedness and strong bonds of trust. With trust, you can almost do anything. More than you can do with oil, maybe you could say. But trust is something that you've got to actually have a system, or you've got to have something that makes that possible. It just doesn't happen randomly. Cooperative bylaws, it's a co-op, so we do have our bylaws that we write together. We write our bylaws together. And then there is a group design process associated with the landscaping and some of the design of the actual homes. There's also the opportunity for sweat equity. People will be working on landscaping together, and they are working on their own homes to some extent. And then engaging neighborhood as a group. We will be reaching out, we'll be giving many, many tours of our little tiny micro community to our bigger neighborhood because they're very, very curious, and we're hoping to spread some of these technologies as well as sort of the sensibility as much as we possibly can. Next slide. Accountability is easier. Look at, I eat dinner at my neighbor's house once a week. He calls me up and says, listen, your dog's barking. I want you to get him to shut up. I move very quickly to take care of that. Now, if he was somebody I didn't hardly know, I'd be like, yeah, I'll take care of that. Right? It's just the way we are as human beings. Accountability is really high when there's trust and connection. And we're counting on that as part of the DNA of this model. Less dependency on vulnerable institutions. I mean, obviously, we've seen that in early recent times where we can't really count on much from our institutions. Fosters living sustainably, obviously, we're always expanding our conversation inside of sustainability, partially because we have that intentionality in the community. It's built in, and reduces consumption. That's just in the oxygen that we breathe. We're always able to reduce what we're consuming because we're reusing so much and because we've got each other to share from. And that's got an environmental and an economic benefit, clearly. Next slide. All right, so here's some of the projects that we're looking at. One of them, well, I'll show you that we are starting in the next year. This is a replicable model. Look at, we were just talking over dinner how much this would be applicable to blighted urban parcels that, you know, sort of had this exodus from the urban core, and an individual going back in there and wanting to plant a home, probably not as likely, but if 20 people went in there and built a micro community, that is much more likely. Is this fine? All right, so let's go on and see the. So this gives you, this is where we fit 33 homes on probably, what does it say? That's probably like maybe an acre and a half. And we have a mixed-use commercial building where we would put the elders upstairs most likely. So downstairs would be a mixed-use commercial building, put a little elevator in, and then you put your elders upstairs, and the rest of them are different types of housing, duplexes, than some single houses, so that you try to get diversity in socioeconomic status as much as possible. One of the things that can happen with these co-housing communities is they turn into affluent ghettos. It's hard to afford a new construction. It's so expensive. So that's right in inner city Ithaca. That one is not going forward. We pitched it, but he didn't bite. Next slide. And then this is a sort of a wedge-shaped piece of property where we were fitting 42 homes in. And I think that was like 4 acres and 6 dwelling circles with a big community garden. We're putting in gardens in every one of these that we do. And this one was going to use a district heat, maybe a CHP plant on this one. Next slide. This shows. This shows you the project that we are going to be developing. It's over here. We'll drill into it, I think, in a minute. But you can see how close it is to the urban core. And one of the things that we're going to utilize here is we'll actually get kayaks on site, and people will be able to kayak to Wegmans and to some of the bigger stores downtown just by getting on through that flood control channel from this parcel. Next slide. So that shows you the parcel. It's on a railroad track, which we'll be crossing, then crossing the canal and walking into town. Next slide. And then that shows you the pocket neighborhoods that we'll be creating. We may be doing a larger building there where we can get more affordable units in it also. That has to be worked out with the town. And worked out with the composition. It has to fit into the landscape of the composition to make it work. Next slide. That gives you a sense of sort of the feeling that we intend to end up with as you approach your home at the end of the day or whenever. Next slide. And that's it.
Guys, is this good? All right, I'm gonna see if I can work this thing. I'm a dude, so she's gonna come.
lot of advancing, so we're going to stick around. Hi guys, my name is Mike Gabrinelli, and I am not a public speaker at all. I don't have any formal training in sustainability or architecture or urban planning or anything like that, so that should go really well. Essentially, I started blogging. I'm a designer, and that's my blog, RochesterSubway.com. I'll just get into it. So you're thinking, all right, what's the big deal? This guy has a blog. Everybody has a blog. But my blog was inspired by the Rochester Subway app. Not the sandwich shop. It's a stupid joke. It's actually not a joke. I do get calls from people looking for employment making sandwiches. I think when you search for Rochester Subway or Subway Rochester, you get all the sandwich shops, and mine comes up at the top of the list, and people call me. I don't be a sandwich artist, but next slide. So my site was actually inspired by the actual Rochester Subway, and a lot of people don't know that Rochester had a subway at one time. Not going to get into a whole lot of the history of it. Next slide. Essentially, Rochester was built on the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal ran right through downtown Rochester, and that's it, right in the center, that dirty, filthy-looking ditch there. It actually was the sort of the generating, the life-giving system for Rochester, brought in goods and all kinds of stuff, and Rochester was built around it. That's City Hall right in the center. But then, as Rochester grew more and more dense, they needed to widen the canal. So they essentially rerouted the canal south of Rochester, and we were left with this empty ditch. Fortunately, our city planners had the foresight to actually reuse it and turn it into something. And what they did was they laid tracks in it, dug it out, laid tracks in it, and covered it over, turned it into Broad Street and the Rochester Subway. And for about 25 years, it carried people and industrial goods and supplies. Next slide. Rochester also had an extensive streetcar network. You can advance. We also had 5 different railroads and interurban lines, rail lines that came into downtown Rochester. One from Geneva, actually. Go ahead. But in the 1950s, mid-1950s, all of that was replaced. The subway, the rail lines kind of died out. The subway was ripped up and literally replaced with our interstates. That's Interstate 490 and Interstate 590. Literally were built over the right-of-way of the old subway line. And I love 490. I use it all the time. Not all the time. A lot. And it's really convenient. But like I said, I'm not a traffic engineer or anything like that. Next slide. I'm a designer, and I thought it would be cool. This was the construction of the Rochester Subway into downtown. That bridge-like structure there was actually the aqueduct that carried the Erie Canal over the Genesee River. And those are the tracks being laid, and Broad Street was constructed over top of the aqueduct. So as a designer, I thought, wow, how cool this was. And I'm not from Rochester originally, I'm from Long Island. And I thought it would be cool to kind of design a Rochester subway map and sort of imagine what the system might have looked like had it still been around, had we not gotten rid of it. Or you can skip past it. So I wanted to hang the story of the Rochester subway on my wall. So I designed this map with the help of a friend, Otto von Drack, who helped me identify the original subway line. That's it in blue right there, and all of the original stops in white. And the orange, yellow, and red were proposed extensions at one time or another. You can advance. So there's a close-up of the downtown area. Keep going. And there's the fast ferry. Rochester had a fast ferry at one time, so I thought I'd include that. It ran for about a year or two. People stopped using it. Go ahead. So the subway map is a fantasy, but it's opened up sort of Pandora's box. Everybody who sees it kind of has a visceral reaction to it, and not everybody reacts quite the same way. I get a lot of stories from people who remember writing it when they were kids. I've gotten business proposals from people wanting to reopen the subway or turn the abandoned tunnels into sort of a shrine. or a museum or something. I've heard ghost stories from people. The photo on the left was actually a photo somebody sent in. The glowing orb, they said, was a ghost that chased them out of the subway tunnel one night. So a lot of people say that the subway map has sort of instilled a sense of pride in them for their hometown, as though this fantasy map puts Rochester into the exclusive league of cities around the world with real, actual transit systems, which it does not. Go ahead. But, I mean, the full magnitude of what I had created didn't hit me until I started receiving hate mail from people. Go ahead. This is Christine. This is not Christine. It's not actually Christine, but she sent me a letter. Go ahead. And she wrote me to say, this city does not need another wacko liberal project to waste our tax dollars. We do not want your stupid bus station. We do not want a fast ferry. And we do not want a subway. Buy an SUV if you need a ride. All right, fair enough. So I thought about Christine's comments for a while. I'm a sensitive guy, so I'm like, well, why is she all up in my... Really, I just wanted to design a subway map. I'm not trying to bring it back or anything. But, so anyway, I thought about her comments for a while, and I started writing about projects like these on my blog. And let's take a look at some of these wacko projects, I thought. One wacko project is the Inner Loop in Rochester, which we were talking about at dinner tonight. This was in a highway, 6 to 12 lane highway that kind of wraps around the downtown district of Rochester. Go ahead. It wiped out entire neighborhoods, and you can kind of see it in this 1960 or 1959 aerial photo over there on the right. Entire neighborhoods were wiped out. The street grid was interrupted. And in late 1950s, early 1960s, this cost $34 million to build. Today, it's sort of choking off development. There's a lot of good things happening in the small neighborhoods to the east of Rochester, and while the business district in Rochester is kind of active during the week and on the weekends, and at night it's sort of a ghost town. But this trench, this moat-like structure acts as a barrier, a physical barrier and a mental divide for people. It's very difficult to traverse if you're a pedestrian, and as you can see, it doesn't get a lot of automobile use either. I think the traffic counts are something like 12 to 20,000 cars a day, depending on which section of the inner loop. And this thing is a 12 lane, you can see 12 lanes, and it's not necessary at all. Go ahead. This is a picture of somebody, quite typical actually, trying to cross it, which is unsafe and just not very conducive to a walkable neighborhood or community. Go ahead. So that was one wacko project, I thought. Oh, and today we're looking for another $25 million just to fill in a quarter of that inner loop. So the dollars continue to pile up. An ever-growing network of streets and roadways, go ahead, highways, and all the ongoing maintenance and rebuilding. In upstate New York, a roadway really only has a lifespan of about 20 years. We have to basically tear it out to its foundation and rebuild it. So maybe not necessarily a highway, but a roadway, a mile of road to rebuild could cost around $4 million. So a lot of costs that are associated with that, and it's not a very sustainable thing to keep expanding this network. Go ahead. Road widening projects, which are still going on, new highway interchanges. This is also, all of this is in Rochester, but two new interchanges, Interstate 590 have been proposed and are going to be built near University of Rochester for the cost of about $110 million. Municipal parking garages, part of this one collapsed. We built a lot of these things in the 1960s and 70s, and they're sort of an eyesore, and there's a lot of maintenance and operational costs that go with these things. Not to mention all of the businesses that were wiped out, so we could build them. Fancy new bridges. So go ahead. So $600 billion since the dawn of the interstate highway system have been sunk into road construction projects. That's just road construction projects, not the maintenance. And that's, not money that was set aside for highway construction. This is public money that's been sucked in to build it. Go ahead. So Christine wouldn't be getting very far in her SUV if it weren't for wacko projects like those. That's also not Christine, it's just a stock image, but I thought it was cute. The problem with Christine's argument is that transportation really is about much more than getting ourselves from point A to point B. Transportation is about connecting people to jobs. It's about connecting people to services and food supplies. It's about connecting people to family. And not just those of us who have the ability or the means to drive a car. And think about this, there's a large and growing demand now across the country for walkable urban living, being able to live without a car, being able to walk to work and to shopping. Younger people, college graduates like yourselves, but also older people, retirees, they're all seeking out places that can give them this type of lifestyle. And Rochester has very, very little of this right now, but it represents a large economic opportunity. You can kind of just advance the slides to this. This is supposed to be go ahead. But I mean, this is what we're after. We're looking for foot traffic, people on the street, types of things that attract businesses to a downtown, to a community, and in turn attracts more people, more foot traffic. And why wouldn't we want to do everything humanly possible to encourage more street activity and life on the streets? Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. All right. So basically, when you have people on the street sharing a public space, I think that's when real fun stuff happens for a city, for any community. Fun stuff like window shopping, which we don't do a whole lot of anymore, at least not on the street. You go to a shopping mall, but it's sort of a different experience. Not very good for an urban setting. So this is a small section of Jefferson Road in Henrietta, which is a suburb of Rochester to the south of Rochester. And this is really just a small section, maybe not even a mile long, but everything we build in Rochester today, and you can plug in the name of your own community, it probably will, the story probably still makes sense, holds true. Everything we build has to be built in the center of a parking lot or around a giant parking facility. Even urban projects, we call them urban projects, like College Town at the University of Rochester, built around a big parking garage. And really, it's because 98% of us drive mostly everywhere we go. And the problem with this is that it creates places that aren't worth caring about. And also, a lot of people like to point out, well, in the future, science and technology will kind of take care of things. We'll build cars that are super energy efficient or run on water. There's really no hydrogen fuel cell, hybrid electric, wind powered, solar powered vehicle that will ever solve this mess, because we'll always need that 10 by 14 parking space, or we'll always need to accommodate the movement of tens of thousands of vehicles through an area. And so, next slide. So, as James Howard Kunstler says, if you're not familiar with him, he used to write for the Rolling Stone magazine, and he just kind of rants like I do about poor urban design, but I think what he says is really quite brilliant. Places like these aren't worth caring about, and that's the problem. He does this thing where he shows a picture of an intersection like this, and there's a Walmart on one corner and a Target store on the other corner, and the picture is from like the entry way to the Walmart, and you can't see the Target store across the street. He says because of the curvature of the earth. And it's true. I mean, the way we design our communities is really quite ridiculous. That's probably unsustainable. All right, go ahead. So one of the things that I like to do on my blog is to write about and show people places that we used to care about before we needed more room to park our cars. Go ahead. Places like the old RKO Movie Palace in downtown Rochester. And cities all across America have places like these. Many cities were able to save them. Rochester, unfortunately, was not. Go ahead. In the early 1960s, right after we got rid of our subway and our streetcar network, we started systematically taking places like this down so that we could park our cars on top of it. And it's really unfortunate because I can't tell you how many people have written me or left comments saying how magical that place was. You know, memories of taking a date there or watching Saturday morning cartoons with the family or whatever, and how beautiful the building was and how lively the streets were. And I think this really destroyed all of that. Go ahead. And this is just a slide of the theater floor. So that's the RKO theater floor. You can kind of see the bowl shape there. The transit authority is building a new bus terminal on these parking lots right here. They dug that up, which I thought was kind of ironic. These things have a way of coming back to life. So this is a building recently that actually Chris and I worked really hard to try and save. This was a 19th century brew house it was designed and built by a notable beer guy named A.C. Wagner in 1889 or 1890 for the Standard Brewing Company, and it's situated right on the edge of High Falls. Rochester has this waterfall right in the heart of downtown. And an investment company called KPS Capital came in and they bought Genesee Brewery, and they did a lot of great things for the brewery. Put a lot of people to work and stuff, but they wanted to renovate the building across the street from this one and turn it into a visitor center, a two-story building. And they wanted to tear this building down to put a parking lot, because obviously they wanted people to come to the visitor center and people needed a place to park. But underneath all of the layers of yellow paint and broken windows and stuff, this was really a one-of-a-kind, world-class building. Personally, I was really more interested in trying to save the public space that was created by the presence of these buildings and their relationship to the street. Next slide. So I created a Photoshop rendering using actual photographs of the property, and on the left is the Genesee Brewery Visitor Center. In the center is the restored brew house building, a historic building, and then on the right kind of see it. High Falls is kind of in this gorge, and the entryway to the garden area, future garden area trail. And so I was trying to show people the type of public space that only these buildings could have created. Unfortunately, that was another fantasy. You can go to the next slide. The mayor and the zoning board agreed with the wishes of the investment firm, and so now what we have is a historic empty lot. We have a beautiful visitor center and restaurant, but it's just not the same urban type of urban experience. So that sort of epitomizes the problem. And then when you look from this angle, it's even scarier. Over 60% of downtown Rochester's surface area has been intentionally wiped out for the sole purpose of storing our vehicles. Then when you sort of look at that, let it sink in, think to yourself, how much city can actually exist between all of the dead spaces on this map? And it gets even uglier when you're on the ground trying to walk through it all. So you can see that the transportation choices we all make have a real lasting impact on our community. I sort of made a joke during my TED Talk because I did the same presentation in November when I gave a TED Talk in Rochester. You guys can probably follow along on your smartphones and it's exactly the same thing. But I said, 100 years ago we didn't have to have a TED conference to share ideas because the streets served as the living room of our community. And it's true. I mean, you live a lot of the same things Susan was talking about. You You shared community space. You lived above retail. You went out to do your shopping. You ran into people you knew or didn't know. You made conversation with people on the street. There was sort of a, obviously I wasn't around, but I can imagine that there was more of a community feel to it. But today, next slide, this is what our community looks like. We sort of drive around everywhere and communicate with each other through the windows of our cars. And at the same time, we ask ourselves, you know, why does our community look the way it does? Parking lots everywhere, deteriorated buildings, you know, not a lot of shopping and things like that. The sad part is we don't really understand that we have a problem and that it's self-made. So I asked our county executive a while back, I sent her an email, and I asked if there was anything she'd like to see changed or improved about our transportation system in Rochester. And this is what she said. Our local transportation infrastructure is far more than adequate. The average commute for residents in our area is a scant 20 minutes. Skipping ahead to the last paragraph. At present, our residents and visitors seem to be very satisfied with the transportation infrastructure we have in place. So I realized that she's right. It only takes 20 minutes to get anywhere in Rochester. You're not going to run into a lot of traffic. It's not like a bigger city like New York or even Boston. You can get anywhere in 20 minutes as long as you're behind the wheel of a car. And that's the issue. At present, our residents and visitors seem to be very satisfied with the transportation infrastructure we have in place. Well, I think that's debatable. That depends on who you talk to. Go ahead. And then I asked people, all right, you have to ask yourself, are you satisfied with this? And I show, you know, what our downtown landscape looks like. You know, our motto could be Rochester, a city with a 20-minute commute to nowhere. It's that sad. So, anyway, next slide. So, you know, I founded an organization to try to combat that a little bit, called Reconnect Rochester. And as I said, we're not trying to bring back the subway. Our goal is really to create safer, more attractive streets and neighborhoods through the effective use of land and transit. We're working we're working with throughout the region to improve pedestrian, bicycle, and rail facilities. We're also working with our local transit authority, RGRTA, to encourage the use of public transit, because we do have a good public transit system, especially if you live in the city. So, you know, we're doing programs like Rock Transit Day, where we literally give away free bus passes to people and just make it sort of a social event and see how many people we can get to leave their car home for a day. And, you know, that's pretty much it. I mean, we're a small group, so I would ask you all to maybe help by asking yourself a simple question next time you get your car, every time you get your car. Do I have to drive today? Or can I walk? Can I take the bus? Can I take my bike? Anything. Do I have to drive today? You'll find out that, you know, oftentimes, yeah, I do have to drive because that's just the way we build things around here. Winters are rough, but there's a good percentage of the time where you might find that, you know, you can walk to get your stuff at Wegmans, or you can go on Google Transit and there's a bus pulling up rather soon. It's not as difficult as you might think to try transportation alternatives and maybe have a positive impact on your community at the same time. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike and Susan. Those very interesting and enlightening talks. We have about 20 minutes to take questions, so Adam's going to be coming around with the microphone, so if you want to raise your hand if you have a question, please let me know if you want to direct it to Mike or Susan or both.
In the pocket communities, I was wondering how you go about getting all those families to agree to purchase the community together. Just like how you get people interested in owning it together.
Yeah, that's a great question, obviously. I didn't. They found out about us. I did a little bit of marketing. They found out about us, and one by one they came and looked at the floor plans and looked at the site and decided they wanted in. And then we hung out together. You know, we did some dinners and stuff together so everybody could meet everybody and decide that they could live with them. And so the standard co-housing model is driven by the homeowner. Co-housing got started in Denmark by a bunch of, couple of women that got together and didn't want to live isolated and separate anymore, so they formed this model. And so it's mostly driven by people that find the land together and then find somebody to do the build out, right? The thing that I'm doing is what you could call developer-driven or builder-driven co-housing. So it's kind of like I have, at this time, which is pretty unusual, I didn't say this yet, but by virtue of my web presence, I suppose, as well as we've had some pretty good press, I have over 20 people right now on a waiting list, which is emblematic of the attractiveness of this model. And so what I'll be doing is really putting together a package, a concept plan, maybe some, definitely some floor plans, figure out a bunch of the site development work, and then I'll be sending it out to those people, and then they'll come to a big meeting, and they'll meet each other, and maybe come to one of the listening workshops. That's sort of a precept, and then move into making a decision as to whether they want to participate, live in a pocket neighborhood, and then they'll probably put down some kind of deposit to secure their home. So it's a lot of conversations.
So these are people who already have jobs, like they're less concerned about finding jobs near the location?
Yeah, so your question goes to what's kind of the demographics. Right now, the people that have expressed interest do live locally. Some, though, are planning on moving here and can telecommute or will find a job in Ithaca. Yeah. I can repeat it if you want to see it.
How much of downtown Ithaca do you expect to be
How much? Are you asking how much of the open space do I plan on having one of my neighborhoods in? All of it, if I can help myself. No. Is that your question?
Yeah.
It's in the actual downtown sort of urban center. Of course, look at Ithaca, is not that big. The actual population of Ithaca itself is only like 30,000. Our population doubles when Cornell comes in, because they're 30,000. But there isn't a lot of infill parcels. I am, scout looking for more infill parcels. I'd love to do this infill. You can tell the next site is not exactly infill. It's right outside the city limits, and it has walkability, but it's not as urban central as I'd like the model, to occupy. And I'm hoping that, this next project will get, some traction will get created so that I can work with some landowners in the city to do it, to build like that in the city. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yes.
I know that you're very involved in making eco-villages and, creating sustainable communities, but do you also think, that preserving, historical sites and preserving historical buildings is just as important as creating, a sustainable community?
Yeah, I should have said that when I say on my little blurb thing that I'm a builder, I'm actually a remodeler. I've been remodeling. New houses are easy compared to remodeling, and I love old structures. In fact, I applied for a grant, a $300,000 grant, to do what's called an idea I had for deep energy retrofits, because I would really find exciting imparting some of these aspects and concepts and elements to existing homes. Now, as I described, we have to reorganize the home in order to have a relationship with the community space, so it's a little bit tricky. But I still would love to find those neighbors or those cluster of houses that are existing and impart some of these concepts to it so that they could, not the least of which being the energy envelope, so that we could conserve existing structures, absolutely. Yeah. It's a little hard to get them to perform at the level that these new homes are going to perform. So that's the tricky part. Does that answer your question? Yeah, I mean, the houses that Mike was showing, are on those buildings, I mean, they're exquisite. Some of the structures that are here in Geneva are just make your heart ache. They're so wonderful. Those row houses, yeah, that's gorgeous architecture.
Hi, I was just wondering, specifically in terms of the gardening aspect of it, are there going to be like workshops included? How's that? I feel like that's a kind of a whole world within itself, like gardening, kind of maintaining a garden, how they're going to coordinate that. I feel like maybe there's not as much work as I think there is involved in it, but.
That's great. For instance, I have no capacity in that regard. I have a neighbor actually right now that has this amazing green thumb. There's nothing he touches that doesn't propagate. And I eat what he produces. He can't help himself. I have to eat that because there's too much, right? And eventually, I guess it'll be a bit like that. The people that already know what they're doing, and you'll get this osmosis way of learning, right? Someone will be out there gardening. I'll be like mystified by it and intrigued and ask questions, and eventually I might be able to do it. So I think that by definition, or by them being of certain magnitude, we'll have people that know different things. It's basically because and get to reap the benefits of each other's skill sets. If we need to build a bike thing, I'll build that. I'm not gardening and I'm not cooking either. But there's people that like to do those things, and I plan on benefiting from them. It's a wonderful, to use an overused word, it's this wonderful synergistic kind of relationship thing. Kind of cool. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
It sounded like you were concerned about if you don't know how to garden, how's that going to work?
Yeah.
Yeah. You just get to enjoy it. Yeah.
How would you handle disputes within the community?
Inevitable dispute question. No, it has to be asked. No, it's great. Thank you. That's one of the kind of albatrosses of co-housing. That's definitely, if you took a poll of the people that live in Eco Village, that's their primary complaint. The way that we're dealing with it is we are going to be learning consensus building skills, but the primary way is this active listening distinction that was pioneered by a gentleman, or designed by a gentleman by the name of Thomas Gordon. And the technology is really, really simple, and it's not easy. And I really do think it's an emergent realm, and that is that to engage in active listening, you have to agree to be willing to be influenced, and you have to agree that you are going to subordinate you're going to subordinate yourself in deference to a speaker. So what happens is, in active listening, by virtue of the listener putting aside anything like they know, like I know what your world is, or I'm right, or judgment, or evaluation, or assessment, by setting that aside and reaching into the world of the speaker and really, really letting the speaker just process whatever they're processing, and vice versa. Many times what happens is, if we're in conflict, like, to simplify it, let's say you're in my community and you say, listen, I love songbirds, and you let your cat out. And I'm clear your cat is killing birds, and you can't do that. You gotta keep your cat inside. Your cat's gotta be an inside cat. You can't kill these birds because I really love them, and that's why I moved here, blah, 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 right? And then I say, look, my cat's been an outside cat forever. My cat's been outside, But instead of me saying, hey, Mrs. whoever you are, my cat's gonna live outside, and I don't really care about your songbirds, I could say, I would say in active listening, I would be with what it is for you. I would distinguish your love of these birds is really important to your quality of life, right? And you would say to me, wow, it would really be disconcerting to you if your cat stayed inside. And we would basically, you know, what would emerge from that conversation would be that I'm going to put a bell on my cat. Well, you know, another classic example is both of us want an orange. I want the orange, you want the orange, I want the orange, you want the orange. Hey, wait a minute, what do you want the orange for? Well, I want to eat the orange. Well, what do you want the orange for? I just want the rind. We wouldn't have known that if we stayed in conflict. But if we actually listen to each other, what arises is a resolution that neither one of us could predict. There's other examples that get a little complicated. The gentleman by the name of Galton, also Gaultun, is part of this thinking, and he uses it in mediation. For instance, two countries are warring over a particular territory, and they keep fighting over it and losing lives, and they actually people are killed in protecting this land. They come to the table, they talk about it, and they distinguish that all they have to do is create a nature preserve in that domain that they were arguing over, and they both take care of the preserve, and it becomes both of theirs. Things like that come out of active listening that resolve conflicts. And that's as much of a technology of these communities as the photovoltaics we're asserting. In other words, you got the physical environment, you really got to deal with the social environment.
Mike, I think we have a question for you.
Rochester's become so dispersed and the density is relatively low that there are very few people can walk to any place that they want to get to, as it is now. And so the density, given low density, it's very hard to have public transportation, which enough people are going to ride or use. And so you sounds like you're sort of lamenting for the way it used to be, which it's not anymore. And so you can't recreate that because it just doesn't exist anymore. And so I'm not sure what it is you really want to happen given the way Rochester is set up now.
Sure. You're absolutely right. A lot of times it comes across when I'm, showing old pictures of what Rochester used to be that, I'm saying, well, look, can we just go back to the way things were? But really, that's not what I'm trying to do. I sort of started out by saying I'm not this, I'm not that. What I am is somebody who's making observations about the way our community looks now and what I think might be the root causes. There are a lot of causes, I can't get into them all, but the one that I can focus on, the one that I think we can improve is our transportation network, which has become really one-sided, it's really lopsided. And I think it can be rebalanced, not the way it looked like in 1910, but Susan mentioned car sharing. Just the way we build new residential developments. So we're not just focusing on one use, but multi-use facilities. Big box stores, giant parking lots out front. I think that is something that needs to change, and I'm not afraid to say that. It's just the status quo is not working, and I don't care where you are, if you're in Henrietta or if you're in downtown Rochester, that model needs to be changed. So Reconnect Rochester is sort of the active arm of myself. It's not just me, it's a group of people who bring different ideas to the table, because I don't pretend to know what the answers are. It could be a combination of car sharing, bicycle facilities, it could be some form of light rail like a streetcar, or some kind of circulator system that moves people around downtown Rochester and connects all of the great cultural assets that we do have, which is kind of guides traffic or guides pedestrians, giving pedestrians the tools that they need to leave their car at home is what I'd like to see. And so Reconnect Rochester is sort of a little bit of a think tank, a little bit of an advocacy group, But it's a bunch of people who know that we can do better, and we're giving it our best shot.
I was wondering what your opinion of the new transportation or bus headquarters is in Rochester that's being built.
The bus station, RTS's bus terminal.
Yeah.
Yeah. At first I wasn't so sure, and I still have my doubts about the way they're going about it. And not to, sort of dance around the issue, because I do work now closely with RTX, because I realize that we have a common goal. We're trying to get people to use public transit. But I think that all the buses under one roof model is sort of antiquated. And the thing that I really liked about Rochester's system, the way it is now, is that the buses are out on the street, and we have sort of a transit mall, almost, an outdoor transit mall, with really nice shelters that are heated by the city, and you can see all of the buses, and you're sort of in the public realm, and it really should be good for businesses to have that foot traffic on the street. Now, I think there are different political forces maybe at work in Rochester that I don't understand, but one is the business community really feels that having those buses lined up on Main Street, and maybe it has something to do with the type of people that ride the bus or whatever, is sort of a detractor for businesses. So there are a lot of things at work that sort of created the need or the perceived need for a bus terminal and having all of the buses converging under one roof. But there are benefits to it too. I mean, in Rochester as here, winters get really frigid, and having to wait for a bus that may be late, you might be standing outside for 15 minutes to a half an hour, depending. So, having that inside space could be a good thing too. So, and it kind of sounds like I'm giving you a non-answer, but it's not really so cut and dry, I guess. Yeah, we'll see how it works. And like I said, it's the solution isn't one mode. So we have this bus network, and we'll have a bus terminal, but we really need to start bringing other tools into the mix. Getting that bike master plan going, pedestrian facilities, making our streets safer for pedestrians, calming traffic, that sort of thing. It'll all start to work together.
We have time for one more question.
First hand up.
This question is for Mike. And you mentioned the inner loop in Rochester, and you said that it has a chokehold on it. I was wondering what you would do with the inner loop, if you could change it, or if you could get rid of it, what would you do with the space?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The inner loop is sort of a topic that I've really been a champion of, the plan to sort of fill it in, but that's sort of a simplistic view of it. We're really not, the city's not filling it in and doing away with it. They're sort of turning it into more of a boulevard. So right now it may be a 6 to 12 lane highway, but they're going to bring it down to like 2 lanes in either direction and traffic circles at intersections. So they really still are moving traffic, through the area very efficiently. Is that the right thing? I don't know. Personally, in an urban setting like downtown Rochester, I prefer to see the street grid return to the way it was. That map that I showed you with the plan for the inner loop, you can see the street grid and the way it was. There's nothing wrong with bringing that back. There's nothing wrong with going back to the way that was. The street grid worked, and it would still work today. There's no reason to have an interstate running through a downtown like that. So I would like to see the street grid restored, and traffic circles have their place in that toolbox of transit devices. But they're kind of difficult for a pedestrian to manage, a little intimidating, especially if you're a younger person or elderly, Traffic circles are really meant to keep traffic moving without stopping the flow of traffic. And in an urban setting like Rochester, I'd like to see the pedestrian have the focus, be focused on.
Thank you everyone for attending tonight. Please join us on March 11th for the second lecture in the series on energy and waste. And please make sure to sign in on the sign-in sheet that's being passed around. And thank you, of course, to our speakers, Mike